So we're gonna talk about a few things. I know that Dave wants to talk about structure, and I think it's a good way to kind of get into it, because one of the things about a book like this is that it looks obvious on the surface or from the outside. You know, you've got a big event, you've got a chronology. It seems like there's a kind of structure that's just sort of presents itself. But actually, there's a lot of kind of structuring work. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of movement through time. A lot of moving around among different, I don't want to call them characters because they're real people, but we're in a writing program.
Yeah,
so
I call
they're moving around
sometimes
between a lot of different characters and a lot of emotional situations. And so let's start by talking about the structure, and we'll move on from there.
Okay. So when I started out, I got some little diagrams, because I've talked about this many times, and it's really hard for me without drawing, so I'm going to draw it for you. And when I started out, I knew there were a couple ways of going about it. The most obvious structure was just chronological, start to finish. And actually, I'm ahead of myself. I spent 10 years on it. The first 5 years was one version of it for Random House's at Random ebook division, and then Dead in the Water for about a year and a half. And then the second version was the completely reconception of the book. Started over, and the characters, other than the killers, were largely different and completely way of going about it. So this is, everything I'm going to talk about is that second part starting 5 years out. Because it really started with a piece I wrote for Slate on the 5th anniversary, published exactly 5 years out. And then I did a proposal after that. So this is 5 years in, rethinking how I wanted it to work. And I figured out I wanted 10 storylines. I wanted it to be about the killers and the survivors too. And I thought of it in terms of the before story and after, and a bit of during. That's not exactly right, because the survivors, some of them, we get a little bit of them before, not too much, but a little. But anyway, when I say before and after, I really mean killers leading up to it, why it happened, and then after, the impact of it on the survivors and the whole world. And so that's how I was thinking of it. So the before and the after, so the obvious way, obviously, is just to do, you might want to scoot around or something, or I can turn this up.
I love an interview with visual aids.
Okay, good. I know, so I'm really bad about doing this, but like, the way is just like, this is before, during, and after. And this would just be, I was thinking always about 50 pages for the during. And so it would just be like that, and that's really simple. And throughout the next 5 years, it was always in my head that maybe I should just go back to this and just do it simple. But I thought about this I never liked it. To me, first of all, this just feels like two different books. They're completely different. And I mean, the characters, it's like, this book is primarily about the killers, about two people, but also their families, their friends. There's a lot of different characters, two protagonists. Halfway through the book, you kill off your two protagonists, and the rest go into hiding, and so I wasn't able to interview them very well, and didn't have much about them at all afterwards. So everybody in that book is basically gone. You started with a new set of characters. How is that not two different books? And in two completely different worlds. These are two high school kids planning this murder. These are people reacting. They're completely different. And plus, the emotional peak by far is in the middle of the book. But they just seem like different books. And that just seemed, you can do a book 1 and book 2 where they're completely different. But it seemed boring. And also, I had the idea early on that the two stories really sort of commented on each other. And that somehow, I did not plan to alternate chapters. I did not plan going back and forth like that. But somehow, going back and forth between them in some way, there would be a juxtaposition, to use that word, or a clash. You would feel a lot of things. So I wanted to somehow put them together. So like my second simple idea was, so that's number 1. So number 2 was start out with just the during, and then somehow have the before and the after together. And by the way, I was always expecting the after would be longer, because I didn't know how long this was going to be. I was really doubting how much information I was going to have on the killers, and how much I was really going to be able to get. I knew I had lots of information about them to do a profile, and I'd done the Slate piece, but in terms of writing scenes, like I didn't know how I was going to reconstruct, and we'll talk about that later. Like, do I have information on, like, can I do conversations? How am I going to get that? Is that information out there? And it turned out it was, but I had my doubts. So this is version 2. The big problem with this is I've always seen this as the Saving Private Ryan problem. So, I mean, seriously, did most people see Saving Private Ryan? And I couldn't believe, well, I hated it for lots of reasons. But, I mean, the biggest thing, I can't believe that there were reviews out there. Tons of, like, 3- and 4-star reviews would say, and it did peak in the first 30 minutes. But other than that, you can't, I mean, like, is it Aristotle or whoever had the, the classic arc of a story? Is that Aristotle?
Yeah.
You can't do it like this. It's just, it's crap. It's totally wrong. And I knew the book would fail if it peaked in the first 50 pages. This is just ridiculous. Well, it is. So I didn't want to do that. I had to get around that. And also the other thing is, I'm already losing my notes, which is which. Also, I didn't want to quite start with the beginning of the murders. And I had the sense that I wanted to introduce you to these people first, and to feel bought into their lives and feel something at stake. I wanted you to know them, and when they got killed, for it to matter. And I knew early on, I mean, one of the slightly manipulative things I did was I knew that I wanted to introduce several things before the murders, and have some of them die and have some of them live, and not have you know which ones. And 50 pages in, you got to know these people a little bit, really liked them. Some of them were killed off. And that would affect you in a certain way. It would also make you more glad and value the fact that some of the people you were rooting for lived and made it. And you had known, I mean, they were really at stake because some of the other people you met didn't make it. I think it makes it more real and more intense that he might not have made it. Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
So here's my question. So, what was your assumption about what knowledge? I mean, obviously people knew the big strokes, right? They knew about Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. They knew what had happened in a big picture at Columbine.
Yep.
Did you assume that most readers wouldn't know what had happened to specific people?
Yes. I assumed that most people forgot almost all the names, and that people were vaguely familiar. Well, I knew because I did, like right after the Slate thing, I did Talk of the Nation, and so I did, Cullen, but I did various radio things from time to time, and I went around sometimes to schools every now and then. I'd get invited. So I was having some feedback with readers that way. And also, obviously, the Slate salon stores, I always got tons of email from them. That's the best thing about writing online. You get immediate feedback online. So I knew that people would, like, if you brought up a teacher, they'd be like, oh yeah, I remember there was a teacher who died. Or the Practical Island, the boy in the window. Well, if you jogged their memory, they would remember there was such a person. They wouldn't remember their name, and they wouldn't know how it turned out. Unless they had happened to see Oprah 3 years later or something. But yes, they wouldn't know. And I also knew going in, or I assumed that almost everybody had a misunderstanding about what had happened in Columbine. And that almost no one knows that there were bombs. And people are always shocked there were bombs. So, almost everybody thinks they went in, they were part of the Trenchcoat Mafia, hunting down jocks, shooting them, specifically guns, targeting a few people. I had no idea they were trying to kill hundreds. So that was another thing that I knew at some point early on in the book it was going to disclose. And that actually affected the structure. So I knew I didn't want to start right into the murders. I wanted you to get to know them. And also I looked at some samples, some classics of narrative nonfiction when I was going and getting started. And oh God, I'm so terrible with names. The Manson one, what's the name of it? Helter Skelter. That starts with the murders. I think there's a dog barking. I'm mixing OJ in with it. But and something about there's something. Yeah, somebody's hearing something, but the murders are going on. Sentence one. In Cold Blood, he takes about 50 pages. And at the beginning, I was paranoid of being too similar. But that was the one thing that I liked about that, and then I stuck with. And it turned out my stuff was so different. But that's the one thing I thought he had it about right. Personally, I think it's a classic. I think the first 50 pages is really boring. I think the clutter stuff is really dull. And I think that's the one flaw in that book, which also helped me too. Actually it helped me a lot because I introduced these people. I tried several times, and some of their lives were too boring, and I had to cut them way back. And I only introduced you a few of them. And my agent said, some of these kids, they're like 15. Their life didn't get interesting until the moment they came face to face with the barrel of a gun. And so I decided to give you a little bit of a couple people, not introduce all my characters before as I originally planned. But you had to get involved with some of them. So I knew I didn't want to start there. There's also, I saw somebody years ago, these things stick in my head, maybe 15, 20 years ago, somebody had a talk show who wrote a book about Lincoln, And he said he talked to Gore Vidal about it, who'd written Lincoln, a novel,